Public Safety Committee meeting for Wednesday, February 23rd, 2021. Thank you all for being here for our very first meeting of the year. Councilwoman Monica Rodriguez, Chair of Public Safety Committee. I'm joined today by my colleague, Mr. Mitchell Farrell, who serves as Vice Chair, and our newest committee members, Mr. De Leon. I know Mr. Harris Dawson will be joining us in a moment. He is on another committee at this time. And Mr. Buscaino, good to see you as well. Madam Clerk, would you please go ahead and call the roll?
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilmember O'Farrell.
Present.
Councilmember Buscaino.
Here.
Councilmember De Leon.
Here.
And Councilmember Harris Dawson is not present at the time. 4 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. And again, my welcome to our newest colleagues assigned to the Public Safety Committee meeting. And I look forward to this year being an opportunity for us to do deeper dives on issues that were previously not assigned to this committee. Public Safety Committee previously had some of the jurisdiction that it will cover this year was contained in other ad hoc committee assignments, or in the case of GRID, assigned to our Public Works Committee previously. And so given the host of conversations, we sought to have it all incorporated into the Public Safety Committee jurisdiction. And so we've invited AVAC to go over that, provide an overview of the changes that have occurred on the committee to date. But before that, I just want to announce to members of the public, we are going to be taking our first 3 discussion items first before taking public comment. So we anticipate public comment resuming at about 5 this evening, and so that it will allow us the opportunity for everyone who's interested to hear the overview and the discussion items that are before us today. And so with that, I will now turn it over, Madam Clerk, if you will go ahead and provide the call-in information for those seeking to provide public comment later in the meeting.
Members of the public who would like to offer public comment on the items listed on the agenda should call 1-669-254-5252 and use meeting ID 161-586-7607 and then press the number sign. Press the number sign again when prompted for participant ID. Once admitted into the meeting, press *9 to request to speak.
Thank you so much. And that now brings us to item number 1 on today's agenda.
Item number 1 is a presentation relative to the subject matter jurisdiction of the Public Safety Committee.
Thank you. I want to thank you, AVAC, for joining us. Long time no see. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we are, the work of this committee is going to really reflect on a number of different issues, from youth development to addressing directly the spike in activities that have occurred over the host of 2020 in the pandemic, where we've seen spikes in shootings and gang violence. So it's going to cover a broad cross-section of areas, which also include, for example, the reimagining some of our deployment efforts with respect to the department. So we've invited the CLA to provide an overview in the shift of the jurisdictions of this committee. So, AVAC, we pass it over to you.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I believe Joshua Drake is going to make the presentation. I'm here only as an observer, and in case there's a question of legislative history or how we got here, I'm available to assist.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Josh?
Good morning, or good afternoon, Chair. As you said, the committee has a little bit of a change in jurisdiction this year as compared to previous years. The committee is still responsible for fire, police, emergency management, their commissions, police permit review panel, and the city attorney as it pertains to criminal matters. But the main additions for this year will be gang reduction and youth development issues, which were previously in public works, and all the items that were previously pending in the ad hoc police reform committee have been moved to public safety, as that ad hoc doesn't exist anymore. If there's any questions, I'm here to answer them, and so is Zavak.
Mr. Buscaino?
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you so much. This reminds me of when I first arrived here, as you and I spoke offline. As a newly minted council member, it was important for me to bring in the Gang Reduction Youth Development Department as chair of Public Works. The chair at the time of Public Safety was okay with that. This is the rightful place have a grid in this Public Safety Committee. Support it 100%. And looking forward to leading policy discussion on finding ways to prevent gang crime to begin with, and work with our interventionists who do God's work every single day, and throughout our city. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. De Leon, I know, and Mr. Harris-Dawson is going to be late, but wanted, again, just to kind of provide some guidance and introduction as a newer member of the council and the way the committee assignments have evolved. It was important to incorporate the work of GRID into the conversation of public safety, but I wanted to afford you any opportunity to ask any questions that you might have.
Oh, no, thank you very much, Madam President, and Mr. Vice Chair, Madam Chair. I really appreciate your leadership and your direction on the committee. That's so important. Obviously, you made reference to the spike in both, crime statistics, which are not unique to LA, but rather we see this trend across the country. But what can we do in terms of giving hope and opportunity to our youth in particular? So I appreciate your leadership, and I look forward to today's hearing.
Thank you. And thank you, Avak, our in-house historian, for making yourself available for any questions that may have arisen in the context of this discussion. Again, I think what's really important is, colleagues, the events of last year have really cast elevated attention to the fact that we have a whole host of conversations that we need to have, and how interconnected the work that we do is also related to our early intervention strategies. And frankly, so much of the work that I've been doing on youth development ties in so seamlessly to this conversation as well. And I think, Mr. Buscaino, as you noted, it is absolutely best place to have that conversation, given that our members of law enforcement work so closely with GRID on addressing some of the urgent matters that come up in neighborhoods. We need to be better about not operating independent of one another in a committee structure. It's important for us to have these conversations in alignment. And so I want to thank Ann also for joining us here today. But again, my thanks to the council president for helping to realign our priorities. And more importantly, in the conversations of as we adapt our deployment strategies and reimagine public safety, it's important for us to have these conversations all in the same house, if you will. And that was the intent of helping to merge all of those assignments into public safety. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to serve again as chair with respect to these conversations. And so with that, Josh, thank you for that very brief and succinct overview. It now brings us to our next item on today's agenda, and that will be item number 2. Madam Clerk, if you'd like to please read that into the record.
Item number 2 is a Director of Gang Reduction and Youth Development presentation on the comprehensive overview of GRID and report on services provided during fiscal year 2020.
Thank you. And colleagues, today we have our Director of our Gang Reduction and Youth Development program, Ms. Ann Tremblay. Thank you, Ann, for joining us here today. And if you could please provide an overview of the work that GRID provides in the city, and how it fits into our greater efforts with respect to public safety.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, council members. I'm very pleased to be with you today. I am going to share my screen with you, so you just have some slides as I go over this. So I hope I get this right. Is it sharing with you or not yet?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. It's all these different systems, a little tricky. So again, thank you so much for welcoming me to and welcoming GRID to the Public Safety Committee. I'm certainly happy to join this focus and to join, as you said, a comprehensive look at public safety that includes the longtime work of the GRID office and incorporates our close cooperation and collaboration with the LAPD, as well as other city departments such as Recreation and Parks on the work we do. So I know time is not endless, but I am going to try to give you an overview of GRID and some highlights from this past year, as well as some of the challenges we face because of COVID and how we work to overcome those challenges together. I'm very obviously pleased and honored to be here on behalf of Mayor Garcetti, but also very importantly on behalf of our team here in the Mayor's GRID office, our staff of program coordinators, as well as the fiscal accountant team that supports our work and the work of our 27 community-based providers. So I'm also here to represent and talk about the work of those 27 community-based contracted providers who are out there in the community doing this work, out there in your council districts, out there in our 23 GRID zones, doing the work day in and day out, and have done that this last year, really done heroes work across the board this last year, despite the significant challenges we saw. When I joined you, Madam Chair, and the Chief of Police and the Mayor at the press conference on crime stats, I talked about how we've heard a lot this last year about 3 public health crises we face as a nation: COVID-19, racial injustice, and gun violence. And under the Mayor's leadership, GRID has really, all of those partners I mentioned, have really worked collectively to develop and continue to innovate on our policies and programs to meet the urgency of this moment. Our staff and those providers have done a tremendous amount to counter the disparate impact of all 3 of these co-occurring public health crises in our GRID zones. So the Mayor's GRID office, as many of you know, was established back in 2007 to have a single office in a single place where in the city where gang violence was addressed in a comprehensive and coordinated way. We've done that with this place-based approach. So we have 23 GRID zones throughout the city. I think it started with 8 and then grew in number over the year as additional funding and resources were provided by council to get to these 23 GRID zones. In 2015, 2016, we expanded to get to these 23. At that time, we also ensured that there was both prevention and intervention services in every one of the GRID zones. Before that time, that was not the case. I'll also talk a little bit how these GRID zones and the city now have youth diversion and youth reentry services, some of our newer programming that I'll talk about in a little bit. Just for an overview, this fiscal year, the GRID's general fund budget was $25.5 million. We receive about $3.2 million in grants to supplement that, we also used some cost savings this year because our budget was in fact $3 million less, allocated less this year than in the previous fiscal year. So we did roll over some cost savings so that we could keep our agencies this year at the same level of funding as the prior year. GRID's vision is to create communities that are healthy, peaceful, and thriving environments for residents. This is a new vision that goes beyond what GRID's initial real vision and focus was just on violent crime reduction. Over the years, in light of the services that we provide, we worked with our providers to look ahead and look more in a more positive, not just the negative approach, not just reducing violence, but what do we want to see in place of that violence? That reimagining is something that frankly GRID has been doing for many years now. How do we, with this place-based, community-based approach, reimagine that public safety? We thought about the guiding values for that we be culturally informed, that we do it really relationship-based, that it's youth and family centered, trauma informed, that we use intentionality, that we do get that refocus on intentional youth development, and that we use data to inform and inspire practice. That we also updated our mission, again, to that more positive, to promote the overall health and well-being of the youth, young adults, and families in the communities we serve, and really laid out our goals, which is to increase knowledge and access to resources, increase youth and family protective factors with regard to gang joining in youth between 10 and 15 years old, decrease in gang embeddedness for youth and young adults, really facilitate that effective communication in response to gang violence, in response to shootings and homicides, providing training, and then ongoing support and technical assistance for our community-based providers. We do this through what we call a comprehensive strategy. There's been a lot of research over the years about what is effective and impactful for violence reduction outside of suppression, and that's what's really unique and important about GRID. I know we talk a lot about the violence interruption piece, the incident response piece of GRID. It's incredibly important, especially after the last 6 months we saw with regard to an increase in shootings and homicides. But what I think is really, really key is, and that what's been effective in terms of the outcomes we've seen, what the research tells us, what our evaluation tells us, and what we have that other cities in the U.S. don't, is not just that incident response or street outreach using credible messengers, but a comprehensive approach that brings components together: community engagement, prevention, intervention, and the violence interruption, all working together to collectively increase that resilience, increase that well-being in communities, while also reducing the violence, reducing gang joining, reducing gang embeddedness. And those really have come together powerfully in our city. We also, of course, have our summer night lights and fall Friday nights programs, which really bring together all four of these components, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I also just want to mention that one of the things that makes GRID unique nationally and frankly internationally is our robust data research and evaluation component. We have both qualitative and quantitative research and data collection that's done so that we can constantly improve the work, that we can demonstrate its impact, but primarily we do that research and collect that data so that we can constantly improve the practice by those community-based practitioners. And that's been key and very successful, and I'll highlight some of that for you in a bit. I also want to note a couple years ago we started up a website, lagrid.org, which is a great opportunity for the community to be able to see what's going on with GRID. It has the GRID zone maps, it has links to all of our data and research, and we try to also use that as an opportunity to highlight the community-based organizations and have that transparency about the work that we do. As I mentioned, one key component is community engagement, summer nightlights being the biggest piece of that. In a typical year, we do that at 32 sites. We employ over 450 youth and young adults. That's really been a key component. I know in everyone on this call's district, summer nightlights has been a key part of summer safety and of community relationships. Obviously, this last summer we had to pivot due to COVID-19. We still did events. Some of those were at our traditional SNL sites, some elsewhere in the community because those rec and park sites were being used for other purposes related to COVID. So we did 66 grab and go events, distributed more than 24,000 meals, and hired 40 seasonal staff this last summer in our COVID pivot. And again, there's so many unknowns, but looking ahead to try to plan on what and how we can continue to gauge the community this summer around summer safety and summer resiliency with the many unknowns of COVID. So we're still in those planning stages. SNL is a public-private partnership that typically is funded in a normal year by about $4 million in public funds and about $2.8 million in private funds each year. This past summer was a little bit different, again, because we did not have that full-fledged hiring or programming, but still managed to have a successful summer, the best we could in a COVID-safe environment. The gang prevention services that GRID provides are focused on 10 to 15-year-olds and their families. That's key. GRID's model engages the family, not just the youth receiving the services. It is case management services, wraparound services focused on the youth and their family, meeting their needs. The focus of our gang prevention services, unlike some services in some cities, really is on the youth that are at the highest risk of gang joining. We have an assessment tool that's used to look at that, an evidence-based tool, so that we can really get to those youth that are most at risk to become gang involved. And we've had some great results and impact on these services. These are the services that have been provided the longest in GRID. They were the first services provided. On the intervention side, case management services are also provided. Those focus on youth and young adults 14 to 25, also involving their families, however they define that. Again, providing access to resources, wraparound case management services, connection to school, GED, employment, those sorts of support services, all to increase their pro-social connections and reduce that embeddedness in the gang. So that this is part of, again, even though you hear a lot about the violence interruption services with our intervention agencies, they do provide case management services to youth and young adults. I think I had so on violence interruption, this is that piece that you hear so much about. This is where our intervention workers come into play, along with our Mayor's GRID office staff, in responding to all gang shootings, homicides, shots fired, keeping that response, that triangle response we call it, of LAPD, our Mayor's GRID staff, and the intervention worker, keeping appropriate communication and information going back and forth among those key partners in a formalized way, each knowing what their role and staying in their lane is, but really working together to provide in an attempt to prevent retaliatory violence. Our intervention workers get background checks through the city. We do some vetting and work with our providers to do that. Our intervention workers go through training and certification process. over the years, with our intervention workers, we've really built up an idea of this is a profession, a vocation, and a profession, and that they get the training and supports they need to be as successful as possible in their work out in the community as outreach workers, credible messengers. The big piece of the work that intervention does, I had my slides out of order here, is in addition to the incident response, I do want to note that a big piece of their work is what we call proactive peacemaking. That is monitoring hotspots, performing safe passage, doing community-based mentoring, doing that street outreach, doing presentations about GRID, collaborating with prevention, all of those pieces really key to their work. And I'll give you some stats about this piece of their work in a minute. Finally, we have some grant-funded programs that I wanted to highlight for you. Most recently, through a state grant, we've launched youth diversion services in partnership with LAPD at 3 divisions, Hollenbeck, Rampart, and Southeast. That's community-based providers doing that work. We really want to reduce any inequities in law enforcement contact with youth of color and increase the number of youth who are getting diverted to services versus getting pulled into the criminal justice system. We also have a juvenile reentry partnership with LA County Probation that we've been able to restart. We previously had this but ran out of funding. We had a federal grant. LA County Probation is now funding this, and so this is for youth that are in camp and are referred to these reentry services at least 90 days before they're released from camp, so that the providers can provide that support to that youth and their family as they return to their home community. We also have some grant funding that's increased the trauma-informed and healing center approaches for our gang intervention workers. This is something we heard repeatedly from gang intervention workers and case managers about what they needed to better support clients around trauma, as well as sort of be at their best by coping with their own trauma and having that peer support and mentorship. So that's happening now to provide that training and support. Obviously, we saw and I know Chief Moore and Chief Grimalo will be talking to you about the increase in crime, including gang crime, homicides, and shootings last year. Even with that, we did see in the 23 grid zones a 9% decrease in gang violent crime in 2020 compared to 2019. I also wanted to highlight that the research and evaluation that we've had done around GRID has shown a significant impact on interventions impact on gang retaliation. One report was focused specifically on South LA and showed that interventions, incident response, that triangle I talked about, that triangle response showed an estimated 41% reduction in gang retaliation in South LA, 24 to 2017, and a 43% citywide in 2014 to 2015. This was an older report, but we'll be working on getting that with more updated data over time. Some highlights from this past year: despite COVID, over 6,000 youth and families were served by GRID prevention and intervention. That was a decrease from the prior year, but not nearly as significant as we feared it might be because of the challenges presented by COVID. Again, our providers did an amazing job. We had over 1,600 online referrals, the vast majority of those coming from LAPD referring youth and young adults to services. We started that in August 2019, so we did have 731 in 2019, but still, again, despite COVID, lots of folks getting referred to those services. Really impressive is that I do want to highlight is 99,000 hours of proactive peacekeeping by intervention. That was an increase over 2019. So despite COVID, they increased their outreach and activities. They also did a lot of COVID and public health outreach as well. And then as noted there, they did respond, intervention and grid staff responded to 731 incidents of violence in 2020, shootings, shots fired, homicides. I just want to wrap up with some key takeaways to this comprehensive approach that I think is really important to highlight. It's what, over time, all of you who've been involved, all of the members of council that have been involved in the development of GRID over the years, the Chief Moore and his predecessors as partners, 2 mayors now, Mayor Villaraigosa and of course Mayor Garcetti, with the expansion of GRID. All of us collectively and all of our providers really should take great pride in what we've established here that makes us unique from other cities, and some decisions that I think really the evidence, the impact data, all of it shows that these key things have really made a difference in how we approach gang prevention and intervention and youth development for these youth in this city. And that is by having the one office, having the political will and leadership, and making the financial investments the city has made in this work and in these community-based organizations, making them place-based, making sure that they're culturally informed, that there is communication, that systems are in place so that it's not personality driven who's holding that role, but we have real systems in place with us, with LAPD, so that that information sharing happens and data sharing happens regardless of who's in a particular role. Investing in those community-based providers and those experts, including those with lived experience, investing in their professional development, building up their capacity, collaborating with our external research partners, with us, that's Cal State LA leads it, but includes USC and UCLA professors and researchers as well, and creating the data infrastructure we have. All of those things together have really put us in a really strong place with the funding and the guidance that's been provided by council. For GRID, our vision really is a community-led approach to public safety, not just with the absence of violence, but with the presence of peace, with justice, and great resources that these communities deserve. And it really is our hope and our intent, as we continuously improve these services, you look at ways to innovate it, look at ways to improve going forward, that we will collectively reach our goal of safe, thriving communities for all Angelenos, and that's where we're headed.
Thank you so much, Anne. I know that was a great overview, and I know particularly for my colleagues or for Mr. De Leon, just kind of getting a better comprehensive understanding of what GRID office does. I think it's important to reflect on the work that is being conducted, and then we reflect as we go forward with a variety of conversations of how we improve upon the work that we do in this city. That's the responsibility and the job that we have before us each and every day. So I want to allot about 10 minutes for questions, and I certainly don't want to monopolize it. And I know just to give everybody an understanding, today was an intention of just providing overview for those that perhaps didn't engage with GRID previously, to understand the work, the body of work that the GRID office provides. And so I'm going to go ahead and hold my questions and afford to my colleagues for 10 minutes of, if we can keep it brief and succinct, because we've got other folks in the queue. Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Anne, and thank you for everyone tuning in and contributing to this conversation. I'll be very, very quick here. Anne, you mentioned you mentioned a GRID website. Is that the GRID website in total, or is it one specific aspect of the website that you said is very, adds transparency to the proceedings? Was it the entire website you were referring to?
It is the entire website. I think probably one big aspect of that is the research and evaluation piece that was not traditionally posted, so that is there now.
Maybe that's the one I'm thinking of. Is that currently translated into Spanish, or can it be?
It is not. But we can certainly work on that. It is a challenge. We have a lot of Spanish speakers in the office, so that's how we've addressed it. But I believe the referral form information may be in Spanish, but I'll confirm that so that anybody can make that referral.
I just think it would be just add another element of help for folks who are challenged with English. Thank you for that. And then first of all, congratulations on the gang crime summary. Those percentages, very impressive. So that goes to the work of you and your office. So congratulations on that. And then the other question I have is in relation to the specialization regarding a trauma-informed, the healing-centered approach. Are you looking for additional partners that are specialized in that aspect of things? And I ask that for a very specific reason. Or do you already have partners secured and contractors secured for that work?
We do have contractors secured. We did go through an RFP process, and I'll be frank with you, we did not receive, we certainly hoped that we would have received more submissions than we did for that work. But so it ended up being it's two current providers of grid services. But that's not to say that if you have somebody you know, I'd love to hear from them and talk with them, because there will be future RFPs certainly, and then specifically we'll have an RFQ around training and technical assistance specifically, that will have some categories around that topic. So certainly that would be something that if you know folks who might be interested.
And I just, I know there's a nonprofit that Assistant Chief Grimala is very well aware of through her work in Hollywood back in the day, and that is the Visionary Youth Center in East Hollywood, specialize in trauma-related experiences within the Central American community. Trauma experienced in the country of origin and trauma experienced since then through gang activity, a very, very specialized population that they have great expertise in. And I know that there are some of the known gangs that that this expertise would apply to specifically for the workers and the families that are involved in that. And so we can connect you with them.
Terrific. That would be great. Let's do it.
Thank you, Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Mr. De Leon, did you have a question or no? No, you're good. Okay.
I apologize. I was just
no worries. Joe, did you?
The breathless presentation, literally breathless presentation.
So, and in terms of the agencies that have been contracted to do the work, where do we stand with those that are currently in contract to provide some of the services that are covered under GRID? How many agencies have there been newer agencies that have been incubated out of these communities, or have they? What has been kind of the breakout amongst the agencies that have been contracted to do the work? Have we seen an evolution in some of the approaches that they've been deploying in terms of the prevention and the intervention contracted work?
So currently we have 27 contracted providers. Some of them have more than one contract. So we do each grid zone separately, each So prevention and intervention in each of the 23 grid zones is a separate contract. We've also last year did our RFPs for youth diversion and juvenile reentry. And with that, we added three contractors, two of whom had never been contractors for grid previously. So again, it's hard because some of them have more than one. I would say since I've been with grid for just over 7 years now, I've been the director of grid, we have absolutely seen some, I would say, both on prevention and intervention, some smaller providers who may have been subcontractors who then are now main contractors on their own. So I think that's what you're getting at, probably,
right.
Like some of smaller size. And to that point, so I think I think you joined a Public Works and Gang committee a few years ago after we had the RFP, and there were questions about our last big sort of prevention and intervention RFP, and various council members, you included, had different questions and suggestions. So the RFPs we've done since then, we incorporated those suggestions and and ideas that came up during that conversation when we did RFPs last year for reentry, diversion, and for the trauma-informed approach, because those are the ones we've done since then. We added site visits. We also changed and simplified the application, the questions, and when we do another RFP, large RFP for the prevention and intervention services, again, next year is when we would be doing that. We will also be looking to include those suggestions so that we're making sure we make the process as amenable to some of those smaller organizations as possible, and give them opportunities as well.
And so of your budget, where you indicated, so you mentioned $25.5 million, and was the 3.2 in part of that you received in grants of your total budget?
No, it's in addition to.
And so so of the nearly $29 million, how does the grid money break up into services related to prevention versus intervention?
It's about equal. Let me get it for you. So I have it. It's 12 allocated this year. So it's 12.25 million for prevention and 12.1 for intervention. And then there's the reentry and diversion, which is less. But as you see, the bulk of it goes out to prevention and intervention providers. It used to be much more heavily prevention. Intervention was less, but as intervention services grew and expanded, and to impact violence in more areas, that amount was increased over time.
Okay. Terrific. Colleagues, and I want to be mindful of the time because I know we're going to have a lot of public comment at the end, and I want to be respectful. Oh, Mr.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, and thanks again for your presentation. I know this is an issue that Mr. Harris and I have raised over the years. Since the passing of Prop 47, I know there's a significant cost savings with even the Prop 47, something I know Senator De Leon led at the state legislature. Also, AB 109, the realignment of these dollars. To date, how much has the city received?
Don't know whether any of them funds come from Prop 47 dollars. We haven't received any of those grants specifically to grid. The grants that we've received, maybe it's come from those dollars. I guess I should say I don't know the source. The grants that we have are a youth diversion grant and then a Title II grant. The Title II, I know, is federal money that goes to the state and then it gets funneled out via an RFP. The the youth diversion, obviously specifically for youth diversion. So Title II and youth diversion have gone to diversion. The other grant that we get from the state is the one that we've had for years. You'll remember it previously as CalGRIP. It's now called CalVIP. And that one, we are the only jurisdiction in the state that is in the legislation. We get $1 million automatically every year. The remaining dollars are split among jurisdictions throughout the state. So as long as we apply, we get that $1 million. So we do get $1 million from the state, specifically under CalVIP. Those are the only statewide dollars that GRID is currently receiving. The other grant is that grant from the county I mentioned for reentry. So for for traditional GRID gang prevention and intervention services, that is all now currently funded by the city's general fund allocation.
Where's the reentry piece?
The reentry is it comes from LA County money from LA County Probation, part of the JJCPA funding pot.
Understood. And Madam Chair, I'd be more than happy to work with you. I don't want to speak on behalf of Mr. Harris Dawson, but I believe we're getting chump change from those Prop 47 dollars that should be literally embedded into our local communities. Something that, for the record, I supported. I was tired of arresting the same people over and over and over without getting the proper due help. And here we are. If we still feel that folks need the rehabilitation, but we're not getting it based on these Prop 47 dollars. Love to work with you to elevate that narrative and get some
Yes,
answers.
absolutely, Mr. Buscaino. And I think this is not the only area where we're leaving a lot of money on the table for the city. There's and Ann, if you could actually even just address under whose shop does it fall under in pursuit of these grant dollars? Whose responsibility?
Oh, for pursuing grants, specifically, we work together. GRID is part of the Mayor's Office of Public Safety, and we pursue those grants. Now, the Mayor's Office of Economic Opportunity focuses on adult reentry, and they may have some of those dollars, but I couldn't speak to that today because sort of the way it's split up is GRID focuses on the juvenile reentry piece. The Mayor's Office of Economic Opportunity under Deputy Mayor Shockley does the adult reentry piece. That used to be part of us, but it was moved when the Mayor's Office of Economic Opportunity was created. And I know they get some state funds. I just can't say which grant sources that office is receiving now. I can't speak to that. But I could certainly get that information for you.
Well, we're certainly not getting the resource in proportion to the population that we serve, nor the need. And that, I think, underscores some of the biggest problems that we have to address here. And because it's also not going to always fall to the general fund when so many of these issues, there are available sources of these funds. We just have to be structured appropriately to pursue them. And that's an important context for this conversation as well.
If I may just quickly, so you know, too, we are looking very closely now at federal grants with the new administration because GRID previously has been quite successful in using federal grants prior to the last administration, successful at getting grants to supplement work. Like our juvenile reentry was piloted through federal grants. We did have a grant that specifically looked at transnational gangs that the federal government funded GRID for many, many years. So we are now looking at those. We have somebody in the GRID office dedicated to looking at supplementing our work through grant funds.
Terrific. Thank you, Ann. Mr. Harris Dawson, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to lend my support to Mr. Buscaino's suggestion. I think, one thing we might consider as a city is really auditing the Prop 47 and AB 109 savings because it just never adds up at all. And voters say they want to redirect public safety money. They're not saying they want less spent on safety. And this is a safety investment that could that can that we need to be make sure we're getting. I also had a question, Ann, and I'm completely ignorant on this, so pardon me if this is a silly question, but we have the same thing now in the county with Measure J, right? So there's a redirecting of some resources that's supposed to be for the kind of work that GRID does. Have you heard anything about what resources will be available? Are we in line? Are we, banging on the pots and pans like we need to be? Do council members need to be shining a flashlight on that pot of money before?
I already introduced a motion on that, Mr. Harris-Dawson.
Okay. Just before it even leaves the House, and we're a year later saying we didn't get our fair share.
Yeah, we're actually waiting on a report back for that to determine exactly, to make sure that we are getting the share of resources that is in alignment with the need based on the population that we have in our own communities. And so that's actually, we're awaiting a report back on that so that we can get in the queue. I am not going to allow that money to be redirected into the other 87 cities without us fighting very aggressively for it. Mr. Buscaino, I think to your point, again, going back to the whole reason why we now have GRID here in Public Safety Committee is so that we can engage into a much deeper and more comprehensive conversation about how we address public safety holistically. And so I look forward to working with you all, colleagues, on helping to shape that agenda going forward, and working with you, Ann, so that we can actually secure more of the resources and perhaps adjust how we deliver these services in a manner that actually addresses, to the root of what the concerns are with respect to some of the violence that we're seeing in some of our communities, and how we can stem that tide. But thank you very much. Appreciate you, Ann. And colleagues, with that, I want to now take us to item number 3 on today's agenda. Madam Clerk.
Item number 3 is a Los Angeles Police Department to provide presentation regarding 2020 crime statistics and initiatives.
Thank you, and I know, thank you, Chief Moore and Chief Grimala for being here. I know we have also Mr. T-Fank. And colleagues, we wanted, again, for the purposes of the newer members of the committee, an opportunity for us to invite our police department leadership. We obviously saw an unfortunate spike in shootings and homicides for 2020. What we have also seen is how these numbers have paralleled in other major cities across the country. And, again, given the trends that we had historically, this is not one that we are comfortable with. Clearly, in the city of Los Angeles, we're hoping that this the numbers for 2020 mark an anomaly in what we hope to change our course this year, and working with our Los Angeles Police Department in helping to change that trajectory. And so with that, Chief, I want to thank you for joining us today and making yourself available, and of course your team. I wanted to provide you an opportunity to inform the members of this committee on, again, very brief overview. We know what the numbers are, but if you want to just kind of give a quick overview for that and afford any opportunities for questions with respect to our 2020 crime statistics, we'd appreciate it.
Madam Chair, thank you, and to the other committee members, thank you for this opportunity for us to speak today. Pleased to be joined by Mr. Richard T-Fank, the Executive Director for the Board of Police Commissioners, and he certainly is well prepared and can speak also to the various initiatives that the board accelerated with during this past summer, and were reported on with the chair here with myself and Mayor Garcetti last Monday. I also want to thank Assistant Chief Beatrice Grimala over the Office of Operations. My intention this afternoon is to provide a high-level overview, identify some of the strategies, and then provide Chief Grimala with additional time to get into some of the finer details. And then, of course, we hear clearly the desire of the committee to be given the opportunity to ask questions and present perspective. I want to also thank the Director, Ms. Ann Trimbley, the GRID office. Their partnership has never been more important, and has never been stronger. Her work each day and leading that department within the mayor's office is critical to all of our success, not just in the intervention and the violence prevention that those community intervention workers do, but the prevention. This is truly a model that I'm proud of to have seen grow, mature, and be a world-class example of how to truly make a lasting impact on not just hardcore gang violence, but the feeder, the systems, the things that result in people getting into that spiral of gang violence and the loss of life that we see from it. There is, as I said last week, in regards to public safety and the opportunity to be here today, there's no mission more important to our city or to this department than keeping the people of Los Angeles safe. Every day, our people put their lives on the line to protect and build relationships with the communities that they serve. As part of that work, our work is to do so with the high standards of justice, equality, and fairness. Our people work in a life-affirming and life-saving manner. Their courageous work, I couldn't be prouder of what their dedication and efforts are. As a matter for the public, I know the committees are well aware of this, but for the public who's monitoring, the department did publish, and I'll give you the Zoom or the Google, a multi-page document of the 2020 crime initiatives, crime and initiatives. It's a good detail of both a high-level summary of information I'll provide today, as well as a primer on the various initiatives that organizations engaged in public safety across the city. As I said last week, and I'll say here, a year ago this time, we were riding a wave of some of the best crime reduction we had seen in decades. So we had one of the historic lows. We had seen less than 300 homicides for a decade. We had the lowest level of gun violence in more than a decade. We had seen a number of officer-involved shootings reduced to more than a 30-year low. There are a number of other initiatives with our training and development of our people, with our community engagement, that were on some of the all-time highs. And yet we saw very quickly how that could erode with the onset of the pandemic and the related impact on every social institution, every economic support. The very essence of our city has been challenged, as we've seen across this nation, with the impact of this pandemic on our schools, our neighborhoods, this essentials of keeping markets open and keeping fuel lines stocked. The very challenge of every aspect of our life and how quickly it changed. Along with that, in the summer months, we saw a troubling surge in homicides and shooting violence. And so that while we've seen the overall crime picture in 2020 to be an overall reduction in crime, a 9% reduction in Part 1 crime, more than 12,000 fewer crimes that we believe is directly attributable to attributes of the pandemic. What went in the wrong direction is probably the most serious, or is the most serious of those crimes, and that is the instances of homicides and shooting victims. We did see reductions in burglaries, thefts from vehicles, robberies. These are all matters that we think are matters as a result of people who are now at home instead of in the workplace. Opportunists that did not have access to people parking their cars at LA Live or at business and entertainment venues across the city. Those were thousands of fewer theft cases. Retail operations that weren't open, which didn't so that larceny and petty shoplifts would not occur. Burglaries that didn't occur as people were home, so daytime burglaries were thwarted. But what we did see direct impacts on was a troubling beginning of surge in violence and shooting violence, and particularly in our most disadvantaged communities, beginning in June and accelerating through the end of the year, and has continued into January. Additionally, we saw auto thefts, a much lesser important crime, but a crime that we believe is, again, after a decade of year after year reduction, suddenly changed. So as we look back at this past year, and we look at what are the underpinnings of what's influencing that, let me define the violence with a little more detail. In regards to homicides, they increased 36%. We had 257 homicides in 2019. Last year we closed with 350. That's 93 additional homicides. And we did see an increase in arrests. We did see their ability to identify people who were involved in that, not to the degree that we want. Our clearance rate did drop from 70% to about 55%. So our solving these crimes have been impacted by the volume of crimes. But we nonetheless saw our people that were engaged in these crimes and these crime investigations and seeking out and trying to identify and bring them to justice. but 93 additional homicide victims is a staggering amount when you look at the success of this organization. You have to go back to 2008 to find a year that had that level of homicides. So a decade that was lost. In regards to those homicides, the nature of them, they're occurring outside. They're not family violence. Some cities and some portions of the world saw increase in family violence. Our family violence actually, in a reported fashion, dropped. Now, we do believe that sexual assaults, child abuse, and domestic violence actually is being, which we know has been historically underreported, that during this pandemic, those decreases are likely artificial. And we have made efforts and will continue to work with advocates and our community advocates to ensure that people who are victims of those crimes have an outlet, have a venue in which to come and identify, and we'll get them shelters. We'll ensure they have a safe place, but we'll also pursue those predators that they may be feeling like they're forced to live with during this pandemic. To the victims that we do know about, though, in our homicide victims, two particular areas that we saw increases. One was in gang-related homicides, which was 55%, just over half of our homicides, we believe, are related to gang violence. And with that, we also see that those are walk-up shootings. And also multiple victims. So individuals that are occurring outdoor, many times people that are gathering, because we believe that restaurants, businesses, entertainment venues are closed, and so there's more public gathering in the street, people just standing and being around and having a social, if you will, encounter. And they have fallen prey to predators who have come up, walked up, and oftentimes wearing masks, and oftentimes able to suppress, if there will, their identity by this pandemic and the attributes of it, and exact violence. And then from that, because of the impact of our ability to be at bedside, our ability to diffuse instances of initial gang violence, we've been hampered in our ability to suppress the retaliatory violence that is going back and forth. And that's where our work with GRID has been so critical. And I'm thankful of Mayor Garcetti and Ms. Tremblay's efforts to scramble and identify additional funds in the third quarter of this last year so that we could have additional community intervention workers and ambassadors in those communities most impacted by this violence. But make no mistake about it, that this 42% increase in gang homicides is a call to action for the various levers that have been impacted and suppressed by this pandemic. And as we exit it, it's going to be critical that we stay invested in the prevention and intervention work. Enforcement will continue to have a key. Gun violence is much higher today than it was just a year ago. The availability of guns is much higher than it was a year ago. Chief Grimalo will give more details on that. And so getting guns out of the hands of individuals that are involved in street violence will continue to be a priority for us and a critical need. But getting people to stop carrying guns is not just a police matter from enforcement, but it's a community matter, and it's our advocates and our interventionists to encourage people to drop the guns and stop the violence. And that's where, as we move forward, it will be critical if we are going to see success. The other major area we saw an increase in homicides was in homelessness. Our homeless victims today, or homeless people experiencing homelessness, represent 1 in 5 homicide victims. They're occurring, again, many times along in public encampments, in public spaces. Many times they're occurring with other people who are also experiencing homelessness. What's also driving that is their involvement in narcotic sales and distribution, and retaliation and retribution by gang members and others that are trafficking drugs. And then a dispute arises with an individual who may be selling drugs to support their own personal habit. And from that, a dispute arises over possession of the drug itself, or someone feeling they've been shorted, and resulting violence in our street. So our persons experiencing homelessness, last year, 65 victims, people who were experiencing homelessness, were victims of a homicide. That number 1 year before was 41%. So that increase is a marked increase, and it also speaks to the need for us as another attribute of this expansion of homelessness, the expansion of encampments, and the expansion of the public places in which we see gatherings. And and at this point, as we continue to identify ways in which to effectively find people shelter, find them effective supportive services, and have those locations, recognize that those locations are oftentimes hotbeds for people experiencing violence. whether they're people who are victimized and also people within those groups that are preying upon others. As we've said, this is a phenomenon. I'm going to focus primarily on shooting violence. This is not unique to LA. In fact, many people will say, and I will not, with these increases, that it's other cities, other major cities are suffering much more. When we look at New York City at a 37% increase, pales in comparison to Houston, 49% increase in homicides. Chicago, year after year increases, and yet another 53% increase in their homicide and shooting violence. Same with Dallas. Previous year-over-year increase built upon this last year with another 24% increase. So we know that we're not alone in this. I speak frequently with our major city chiefs, our partners. We collectively work to identify strategies that both deal with homelessness, that deal with gang violence, and street violence, to understand what their levers are and how the intervention and prevention work, community safety initiatives, that law enforcement has a shared responsibility. How do we bring to light successful strategies? So when people are asking, is this driven by the pandemic? I believe it is absolutely impacted by the fact of how widespread this pandemic has had on people's sense of hopelessness, people's inability to deal with anger and conflict, and without more traditional senses of a lack of school, a lack of junior high, high school, colleges, locations that can serve as a means of binding us together and finding ways of resolving conflict. Those institutions are not existing, or largely doing through a remote learning, if you will. And I believe that that's having a dramatic impact on the stability of our communities and the stability of people's sense of safety, and also, frankly, their sense of obligation to provide by a certain social contract. What also is impacting this, and it must be said, is the criminal justice system has also been severely impacted. The fact is that zero bail, the fact of a lack of trials, sense of a lack of consequences, people who are arrested 1, 2, 3 times, and trials that haven't occurred and won't occur for months, can create a sense of lawlessness in the community for individuals who believe that this is a time in which there's not going to be a consequence for their act. We see this particularly in auto theft, so we also believe, in talking with rank and file and the officers in the field, that there is a sense about this with people who are engaged in street violence, is that even if they're caught up in it as an offender, that carrying a gun is safer than being shot by someone who has a gun. And then their ability to carrying that gun with little or no consequence affords them the opportunity to also be engaged in gun violence. So these many levers that we've seen over the last decade that's proven effective in reducing homicides and shooting violence are simply been hampered or interrupted. But I'm committed to, as we see the vaccine arriving, as we work with our grid partners and community advocates and community organizations that are stepping into this conversation and doing everything they can to build a community cohesion. When we see the success of Community Safety Partnership Bureau, where in those 10 sites, violent crime went down last year 7%. In spite of the pandemic, it's because of relationships. It's because of a presence of officers in our communities most impacted, but also their ability to have effective relationships with people that are there, that they're there to help protect and serve. Lastly, our people remain committed, not just to identifying those who are carrying guns, those who are committing gun violence, those that are purveying the guns to the communities, but we also remain committed to community engagement. The cuts that the organization sustained during the summer, we've reorganized from top to bottom to ensure the staffing at our area stations remain strong. Our staffing on investigations of violent crime remain committed, and that our community engagement remains. The reduction in our staffing has been largely at the expense of our specialized units and downsizing those, which does mean that we're pushing resources back to the field, back to geographic areas, back to our 21 stations, and also some specialized investigations. So I'll ask the public to understand that as that happens, investigations that may have been handled in a specialized unit will now be handled by more local detectives. Our commitment is that we'll still commit, that those investigations will still continue, and we're still going to pursue justice for those victims and hold others and people responsible accountable. The other aspect of this is we're also finding alternative ways in which delivering police services. We have expanded the number of reports that we take online so that officers have more time in the field. Investigations that have little or no investigative value or follow-up are now being taken online. That's amounting to thousands of additional reports. Beginning this month, we'll be expanding traffic collision investigations to online reporting, which will effectively shift nearly 40,000 investigations to online reporting. These are misdemeanor hit and runs that are minor with little or no investigative follow-up, and traffic collisions that are non-criminal. So a person is in a minor traffic collision with a minor injury or no injury will have an online reporting option rather than officers spending hours at a time completing an administrative report. We believe also that our work in identifying alternatives to calling 211 and 311 and redirecting tips and leads to Crime Stoppers are affording us, again, the ability to save precious time of our uniformed resources for field work and for the ability to work in our communities and with our communities for safer Los Angeles. Again, as I started, this vaccine is arriving. We see a brighter 2021 in the shared responsibility of public safety by prioritizing our work in our most important areas, downsizing less essential and non-essential work, and working in partnership with the full spectrum of what it means to have public safety in Los Angeles. So with that, I want to give Chief Grimala an opportunity to expand on some areas, and certainly to the committee chair, Councilwoman Rodriguez, we know you have questions regarding the makeup of homicide, the homicide profile, the areas in which homicides increase, which portions of the city. Everything was not uniform. We have all that detail, but we also recognize we have a clock ticking, so we want to be more, give you a high-level overview. If Chief Grimala has some additional time here for some more details, and at some point you need to raise your hand and say, but these are the 4 questions that we want to really have answered. Thank you for this opportunity, and we look forward to a safer Los Angeles in 2021.
Thank you, Chief.
Chief, thank you so much. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Assistant Chief Beatrice Grimala, and it's a pleasure to be with you here today. I am the Director of the Office of Operations, and I oversee the 4 geographic bureaus within the city of Los Angeles, and under those 4 geographic bureaus are the 21 areas. And as a preface and a context to this conversation, I just want to underscore, and I think you'll see it as I provide some explanations here today, the engagement, the proactivity, and the dedication that our officers still have to all Angelenos within the city of Los Angeles. But also, I'd be remiss if I didn't drill down a little bit on the numbers, and they are staggering. And then to take you through some of those numbers, what they really mean, besides the fact that we know behind each number is not only one life, but the lives that are impacted as a result, the families, the generational violence impacts that we have and we are seeing throughout the city, especially within our Black and our brown communities. And then I'm going to talk to you briefly about the 10 strategies that we see moving forward. And I hope that you will find this informative. Where I'd like to begin first to the Chief's remarks is taking a look and just providing you some basic information with regard to gun violence and the homicide picture within the 4 geographic bureaus. So this is 2020 in totality. Looking at Operations Central Bureau, 116 homicides, 61 of those gang-related, and in 75 instances, a firearm was used. In Operations South Bureau, 137 homicides, 91 of those being gang-related, and 117 in which a firearm was used. In Operations Valley Bureau for 2020, 54 homicides, 25 of those gang-related, 42 in which a firearm was used. And in Operations West Bureau, 39 homicides, 15 gang-related, and 25 in which a firearm was used. But what is most compelling in this conversation here today is without exception, in all 4 bureaus, the majority of victims of homicide were Black and brown members of this Los Angeles community in all 4 geographic bureaus. And if any members of this committee would later like for me to provide a further drill down for specific areas within the city, I'm very happy to provide those to you and any further information to the Chief's point that you may like to hear. Secondly, where are we today? So let's look year to date as far as homicides and victims shot. And when I say year to date, we're looking at January 1st, 2021 to February 3rd, 2021. Citywide homicides are at 41 compared to 30 this time last year. That's a 36.7% increase. In Valley Bureau, we saw an increase from 6 to last year to date 4, an increase of 50%. In Central Bureau, this year 16, last year at the same time 12, an increase of 33%. And in South Bureau, year to date 16, last year 11, a 45.3% increase year to date. When we're looking at the bureaus, 3 out of 4 bureaus saw an uptick in homicide. So these are just some compelling numbers, but this is within the first month and change of 2021. Driving the numbers, Hollenbeck in Southeast Division. When we look at victims shot, we are up 160%. That's 167 versus 64 this time last year. Citywide, 167 last year, 64. Valley Bureau, year to date, 2021, 27 last year, 12. Central Bureau, 38 now, last year, 25. South Bureau, currently at 91, last year at 18 for this same period of time. And West Bureau, 11 now, 9 last year. Who's driving the numbers? Which areas? 77 and Southeast area. I just thought it was very important to share those with you. But on the same note here, I think it's also very important to share with you some of the gun and firearm recoveries that we're seeing. Year to date, 767 guns have been recovered. In Central Bureau, 177. South Bureau, 280. And 227 of those resulted in an arrest as well. In Valley Bureau, 160. And in West Bureau, 112. Some of the challenges we're seeing with regard to gun violence and gun crime is something that I'm sure you've all heard about, ghost guns. We see an increase in ghost guns, and those are non-serialized guns that people are able to put together like puzzle pieces. Very hard to trace, if not impossible. Hard to put through our traditional systems to link to crimes. And I just want to give you and share with you some of the numbers on ghost guns. So in South Bureau last year, 155 ghost guns were confiscated. And year to date now, in the first month of this year, already 65 ghost guns have been recovered, mainly from the hands of gang members. Valley Bureau, last year, 77 ghost guns were recovered. So I'm just trying to emphasize some of the challenges we find ourselves in. And the other trend we are seeing is the proliferation and use, particularly in South Bureau, of what we call long rifles. And last year we had, at this time, 8 long rifles confiscated. We're already seeing 15. So I just wanted to share with you that type of a larger overview to show you also that our officers are out there being proactive, yet they're up against these very, very high and huge numbers. Now I'd like to turn quickly and talk about the 10 encompassing strategies that the department is involved in. One of the most important is starting February 14th. We are going to see a reallocation of department resources to what the chief was just talking about. That was part of what we call manage attrition. And the chief's emphasis to all of his managers to take a fresh look at where are the needs. The needs are in patrol, the needs are in geographic detectives, so we can have that closer community connectivity. So we are going to see more than double-digit increases citywide in all 21 areas of what we call officers there on the ground, responding to radio calls, hopefully bringing down those call for service numbers with regard to minutes for our response as well. But what are these numbers good for unless we are providing focus, providing great detail, and data-informed, community-focused policing? And that is what is leading the charge for the chief's strategy. And that comes in the terms of, at the bureau level, what we call CSOC, Community Safety Operations Centers, and at the area levels, Area Crime Intelligence Centers. And these are centers which, based on data, create specific missions, driven missions to focus on areas in all of the 21 areas where we're seeing increases, particularly in violent crime, crimes of violence, gun violence. And real-time information is pushed to officers' phones, within their cars on a daily basis, and sometimes it's hourly, as we see different trends and patterns taking place. Secondly, the increase in detective personnel is very important because they're going to the tables that need the help the most. And these are violent crime-related tables. And both the patrol force and detectives are working with what we call density maps. And these maps provide timely and historical looks at things such as shots fired in the area, any type of crimes of violence. And today we just heard at a CompStat inspection in the Valley the great use of density maps in deciding where our deployment picture should go. In addition, the chief talked about alternatives to dispatch. When we talk about cores, when we talk about online reporting, and the dividends from that, we see in officers being available to respond to the public, respond to public needs without being in a station completing paperwork and reports. In the fourth area, we have 4 Bureau homicide units. And I just want to provide you a little bit of data there. In 2020, for example, Operation Central Bureau Homicide handled 118 homicides. And this was a 44% increase over 2019. Similarly, the other Bureau homicide units found themselves being inundated with cases. So what we did was, as part of the reallocation of resources, the reimagining of department needs and community concerns, and our need to be responsive not only to fresh cases, but to cold cases as well, those units as well will see increases in investigators. And this will bolster not only the actual numbers, but we hope the increase in clearance rates, and quite frankly, where the rubber meets the road, closure for victims, justice for victims, not believing because a case wasn't solved a year or two ago that it will never be solved and there will never be any sense of justice. So I just wanted to share that with you as well. We've also taken fresh looks at the health of our gang enforcement units with regard to personnel, who is policing within those units, their productivity, and how are they supporting the overall missions of the patrol force as well. Also, we've taken a look at the health of our senior lead officer program with particular attention to SARA projects and looking at overlays of the neighborhood engagement areas in high crime areas. And we could say, what does all that mean with regard to violent crime? We are holding commands and their people accountable at CompStat inspections. So what are these neighborhood engagement areas doing as far as violent crime impacts? They must answer to it or re-strategize if we're not getting the necessary effects to make that difference at that level. Next, I want to talk a little bit about partnerships. And this is one of the most critical legs to the foundation of any police department, ours being no exception. And we're looking at partnerships both within the law enforcement community, our partnerships with the community leadership, with the nonprofits and other established entities. So I'd just like to go over some of those partnerships which we have built on and are continuing to move strongly. We already heard from Ms. Tremblay with regard to GRID and the strong partnership we have in all areas with her. But let me begin now talking about some of the law enforcement partnerships that are making a difference with regard to gun violence and violent crime. And they are with the ATF, FBI Task Force, the City Attorney's Office Neighborhood Prosecutor Program, CNAP, the AUSA, as the chief pushes us all to do better, to do more, to try to seek federal filings, especially when we're talking about gun-related charges. We're pushing our captains and our bureau chiefs to build even greater and stronger communications vessels with municipal police agencies who border us. And we already have that with so many, including LASD, Inglewood, Culver City, just to name a few. We also find our relationships with parole and probation during times of COVID sometimes a little bit challenging and difficult. as the personal outreach, and we've talked about this before, and the one-on-one contacts that need to be made are often hampered by the pandemic. The eighth point I'd like to make is talking about the maximizing the use and accessibility to investigators of science and technology. And when I talk about that, it's specifically the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. Most of you know that as NIBIN. And the ability for us to submit ballistic evidence recovered from crime scenes, to make associations between casings, between firearms or other ballistic evidence there. And we see the effects of that in helping linkage in fresh crimes, fresh gun violence, but also in taking us back in time, very importantly, to cold cases. Our relationship with the ATF, the Crime Gun Intelligence Center, also known as CGIC, and also DNA testing is something that we are continuing to emphasize so that cases do not grow cold, and we can again bring closure. The ninth point I'd like to make is social media. The robust use of it as a tool to provide information. This can help us with everything from gang crimes to people who are boasting on social media, who are posting videos. We have found this to be a very effective tool in tracking down suspects with regard to gun violence. And also specialized unit support within the department. And that includes gang and narcotics division, our area narcotics units, vice, and traffic task forces. Where we find some challenges, even given all of that strategy, I'd just like to share a couple examples. And the chief touched on it with regard to zero bail, waiting for people to be get their preliminary hearings, etc. We recently had at a South Bureau Comstat an example of during a 10-month period, an individual who was arrested for 6 violent gun-related crimes, and he found himself continuing to come out of the system. And this was in a 10-month period. And again, some of this is constraints of COVID, our ability to hold trials, to hold arraignments, to hold prelims. But I just wanted to share that with you. Also, the challenges we see with regard to gun violence and repeat offenders is in just January of 2021 in South Bureau, there were 24 pursuits. In those 24 pursuits, 60% of them had a situation where a firearm was recovered. So I just want to underscore the risk that our officers do take out there in the field, and I know that this body does appreciate that. We've also talked about the challenge of ghost guns trending up, and also the seeing of the high capacity weapons that are being used on the street. But as we talk about these challenges, there's a marathon here as well. And that's where, again, our community partners come into play. And without them interrupting cycles of violence, and Ann Tremblay, you talked about that, and the importance of intervention, prevention, but also juvenile diversion. And all 21 geographic areas are now involved in taking a fresh look at every single case with few exceptions to see if we can break the cycle of violence, break that cycle of poverty which comes with this violence, which we have seen perpetuated decade after decade, not only in this city but nationwide. So we have a very good relationship with those within that community to bring cases forward and to see if there's a second chance. When we're talking about seeing younger and younger individuals within our community, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, how can we give up on them? We can't. I spoke the other day with Laura Dorino from Children Exposed to Gun Violence. And she told me we can't become cynical. We can't look at a 12, 13, 14-year-old, wring our hands and say, we're going to move on. And incarceration or some type of punishment that is almost corporal in nature is the answer. So we're working with all our partners in that area. But also, I just have to go back to Ann. Knowledge is power. And Ann Tremblay and her very dedicated group of interventionists have provided us, despite these numbers that you see, critical information on gang feuds, historical dates for gangs which may or may not be associated with celebratory activity or some type of violence, information on funerals, repasses, etc. So GRID continues to be powerful to us in all of its 23 zones throughout the city. Also, with regard to community outreach, critical has been our members of the clergy, our neighborhood leadership, our peace ambassadors, and programs such as Building Blue Bridges. I mentioned already children exposed to gun violence, but also groups established and strong and brave, such as the Watts Gang Task Force. But as we kind of close up my statements here, I just want to assure the group here that all of this is not worth a dime if we are not holding our men and women accountable and our leadership accountable. And this happens through our comm status inspections. As we look and review SARA projects, are we challenging our people in these neighborhood engagement areas to bring out the change that our community is expecting and that they do deserve as well. One shout out in conclusion here to our DART teams. And the chief talked about looking at, in times of pandemic, stay-at-home orders, family violence, etc. And the DART teams continue to be meaningful warriors in their own right, going out there in very difficult situations in times of COVID to support us as well. Excuse me, but in closing, I just want to leave you with a few thoughts. Our officers are deeply challenged out there, as you can see. We're still going through a pandemic. We've gone through and still are experiencing social changes and civil unrest. People are on edge for a variety of reasons. So your support of them in words, in public-facing opportunities is very much appreciated. We're all human beings, and that support is something that keeps us strong and keeps us further committed, and we appreciate that as well. Also, we ask for all of our civic leaders, all of our community groups to help us. You're critical in putting out the word of peace over violence, of de-escalation within every aspect of our community. And if you can stand with us and provide that strong messaging, we think that despite the fact that January was a rocky start and a continuation, we can move forward with strength, resiliency, and with the commitment that Angelenos deserve from their police department in partnership with their community. I thank you all very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Grimala and Chief Moore. I just have one question, and I know we have Mr. T-Fank here that will provide some overview on the work of the commission and their priorities and some of the initiatives that are happening there. But, you know, we saw a huge uptick of gun purchases, and I understand, you know, you talk about the ghost guns, but I mean, obviously, we saw over the course of the summer just a huge purchasing effort, acquisition of a lot of guns over the summer. How has that paralleled in terms of our efforts for buybacks, which were historically a tool that we used? How many buybacks did we do given the pandemic in 2020 versus what we've done in previous years? So
we had a buyback in November and early December that was sponsored by the GRID office and mayor's office. And I believe we only, though, recovered about 200 guns. The buyback itself is a great awareness issue about the presence. If you have nuisance guns, you have guns that you no longer use, can no longer safely secure. But as far as bringing guns off the street, the real key right now is the gun sales last year was a record year in gun sales in America. More guns were sold in America than there are than our population. And I saw an article just this morning that in the Chicago area, in the aftermath of January 6th, how gun stores there have exploded with added demands and, again, record sales. And so the prevalence of guns has only increased during this, in the aftermath of this pandemic. We see I'll give you a quote that, Councilwoman, you remember me using last week, and that is, while we saw a 27% reduction in the number of vehicles stopped by officers, changing in our strategies, focusing on more strategic, targeted stops, investigative stops, we saw a 58% increase in the number of firearms found with individuals driving vehicles. we saw an overall reduction in the number of vehicle break-ins and a 50% increase in the number of guns stolen from vehicles. The prevalence of guns on the street today is compounded by people buying more guns and then being stolen, and now they're in the hands of people who should not have them. And secondly, this ghost gun. This ghost gun where guns are currently being assembled like mail order. You go onto the web, you can shop for make a gun kits, and those gun kits will be sent to you, and you can build these guns in your garage. We're 4 out of 10 guns that we're capturing. Remember, gun arrests are up 35% this last year, and a 70% increase in just the last 6 months. So our officers are finding more and more guns on individuals, and 4 out of 10 are what we call a ghost gun. This is make a gun. Like build a bear, people are building a Glock. People are building automatic handguns and assault weapons. We're working with ATF. Ms. Monica Villegas is the director of the special agent in charge for the Southern California Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And I'm working with, on the national level, the acting director of ATF for us to pursue this issue. Because while California is a Brady A state, there are people who, as soon as we make the law change, they are changing the definition of what constitutes a gun part, a receiver, a part that would normally be controlled by gun regulations, and they redefine it or craft an alternative that is keeping us from federal prosecutions. Now, again, ghost guns are not the entire answer. When I talk to colleagues in Nevada and Arizona and other parts of the country where you can buy guns off of a yard sale, and they do, those guns are resulting in people's hands. But it is part of the challenge here. I do think, in going forward, we need to ensure that gun laws were changed in the 80s and 90s so that if you committed a crime with a gun, it came with an enhancement. And it had a deterring effect on people committing violence with a gun because they did not want the enhancement. So they started using replica guns, or they started using bodily force or other, so that they would not get a gun enhancement. Today, what Chief Grimala is referencing, where we make arrests for people carrying a gun and they're released on zero bail. These are people who have felony convictions. And even with and there are others, of course, that have a $35,000 bail, but then are released. And we're seeking bail enhancements. And we need the court's support of this, because these are individuals that are not carrying guns. They may proffer that they're carrying a gun for their own protection. My view is they're carrying a gun, not just for their protection, but for the opportunity. And there is this back and forth and ready availability of guns that's causing this harm.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. DeLeon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to the point, I think Chief Grimala, as well as Chief Moore, on the issue of ghost guns. I know a thing or two about the ghost guns. Obviously, I've worked on this issue for over a decade, and I think for better or for worse, I think I helped popularize the word ghost gun, especially here in California. You actually go to YouTube, there's a video. I have over like 3 million, I think maybe even 4 million hits for the video on YouTube. Not for the right reasons, but it's clear. Obviously, you get the receiver. We saw this over a decade ago. You start drilling the holes. You literally go online. You put it together, in your garage. So anyone who wants to purchase it can easily get access to it. And I know one of the first murders that we dealt with a ghost gun was a young man who was mentally disturbed. I think it was in Santa Monica Community College campus, where he killed his father. I think he killed one of the janitors, and I don't know if he ended up taking his life or if it was Santa Monica Police Department who ended taking his life. But obviously, the ghost gun issue is a very serious issue. I did not know it has become much more pervasive, especially during this pandemic period, and especially because of that angst, that panic, that anxiety that exists today, this sort of rush towards lawfully purchasing, whether it's a handgun or it's a long gun, lawfully, unfortunately, in the state of California or elsewhere. And to the point, I think, because it's something I've dealt with on numerous occasions, unfortunately, is our next door neighbors, whether it be Nevada, whether it be Arizona, maybe a few states over, New Mexico, as well as Texas, where you can, buy a handgun as easily as you can walk in the store and buy a gallon of milk and a dozen eggs and a loaf of bread and walk out. And unfortunately, as we know, that if you have a gun show in Reno or Las Vegas, that corridor of I-80 from Reno, that corridor of I-15 from Vegas, right into Los Angeles, and from Phoenix, Arizona, is a corridor that goes right into our gangs and other folks who are buying it on the illicit market and going down south to the drug cartels south of the border. So obviously we're the largest exporter of high-powered assault weapons, not from California in particular, but handguns and long guns to the drug cartels that drive all the carnage down south of us to our friends with our voracious, consumption, our appetite for illicit drugs here in Los Angeles. So obviously, I want to ask this question with regards to ATF and the FBI. I've had my, and I appreciate the relationship you have with the acting director of ATF, Chief Moore. I've had my reservations with regards to outcomes and the quality work of ATF. Perhaps, I don't know if they're overwhelmed or they don't have enough personnel to deal with the number of weapons that we have on our streets every single day. And I know that's helping to fuel the violence. Are they doing a better job right now because of the major uptick of violence we're having, particularly in communities such as Monica Rodriguez and Marquise, Harris Dawson, definitely, Mr. Buscaino, myself, I've had about 6, 7, I think, homicides in CD14, almost entirely just in the Hollenbeck station. But tell me what's going on with ATF right now.
Right.
Because I know that's their responsibility to deal with firearms.
Well, so it's a shared responsibility, Councilman, and I will say that the ATF relationship in Los Angeles is without peer across the country. We have been in working with them. First of all, the ATF in this district has 7 counties that they're responsible for. Everything from San Luis Obispo to San Diego, to the California border, an immense area. And they give us particular attention. We are one of the few sites in the country that have a crime gun intel center. And that is a center that does gun trace analysis on not just the shooting of a weapon to get the forensics, so we can identify rounds that come from that gun, and rounds that we capture out of victim bodies. We can identify when that gun comes in custody later. We can comparison and match those guns. But casings, so that casings that are left can be forensically identified and matched to guns that are later captured. And then you can tie casings from one crime scene to another, so that you see the path of gun violence in our neighborhoods. That forensic work is only as a result of us having a second NIBIN machine and task force officers assigned at the discretion of ATF. And we meet with them regularly. When we have cases, everything from the explosion that that firefighters, by the grace of God, did not lose their life over, and the work that they did to come in and forensically assist us and pursue justice on the federal and state level, but to all the way down to gun. We are currently in the midst of several investigations where we utilize with ATF undercover buys. We are buying guns from manufacturers, from wholesalers, from distributors that are purveying guns in our street. The other thing is, it's unfortunate to see U.S. Attorney Hanna leave, but I understand the dynamics of U.S. attorneys as that works. But with his place here, his priority with this city is gun violence, and it was to designate a dedicated set of attorneys that all they worked on was state federal prosecution for gun violence. And I believe that whoever follows him will likely follow the same course, because that has been a custom for the last decade. So I'm proud of the work here. ATF could double in size with agents, and we would have more than enough work for them still to do. And then lastly, the district attorney's office. district attorney's office, their hardcore gang, their regular district deputies are pursuing gun cases, are filing gun cases, are aggressive, as is the city attorney on matters of misdemeanor cases, on matters of also identifying the use of purchasing ammunition and gun violations as far as registration and so forth. So I believe the process is working. All of it could be improved by added staffing. Prohibited possessors. The state of California has, again, like the Brady A case, it has great laws, as you know from your time in Sacramento. This city alone captures 200 to 300 prohibited possessor cases every month. That means 200 to 300 people who should not have a gun that have been prohibited, they're designated by the court that be prohibited, and we end up supporting DOJ, Department of Justice, at the state level.
Chief, is that your feedback? I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is that your feedback, sir?
Councilman De Leon, I believe you're on mute. You need to be on mute.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I'm sorry, to finish my point, California DOJ, Department of Justice, has a responsibility to identify, track, and ensure that prohibited possessors are not in possession of firearms. They simply do not have the resources to do that. In Los Angeles, this was under then Chief Beck, and I've continued it. We dedicate resources to identify those individuals and regularly make arrests for people who should not be in possession of those firearms as yet another deterrent value. So the gun process here, this is much like the rest of what we've talked about here today, is the model in Los Angeles is not just contemporary, but it leads the country in strategies. But we have been severely impacted on a number of that model because of COVID. Everything from probation and parole officers who are not in the field, court systems that are not following up and taking action, impacts on our ability to do outreach and engagement. So there's just every aspect of the look at the model. There's been an impact by this pandemic, which is why I think the mayor has said, and really has challenged all of us, to make last year an anomaly and not a trend. But our commitment today to you is to say that we're committed to work this model and also identify with you further enhancements and how they can be further strengthened.
I would say lastly, through the chair, and perhaps we can work through our chair, Ms. Rodriguez, with our colleagues, up north in the state capitol. I know I've dealt with several attorney generals, obviously, because we actually know we have the database and we know who are possessing those weapons, who should not have it in their possession, if they're still physically there at the last domicile that we have in the database. But the number of weapons, without question, in the metropolitan Los Angeles area is gargantuan, and I think that could have a huge impact on reducing the number of homicides in LA. Obviously, it's still not dealing with the root causes of anxiety, the root causes of poverty, the root causes of lack of opportunity, the root causes of just, I am a person who is deserving of respect and dignity, and I have a real opportunity to succeed, so therefore I don't have to engage in any illegal activities or succumb to the type of recruitment that occurs with a lot of our street gangs. But just one last clarification point. Ms. Grimala, you made a reference to, what is the difference between a long gun and a long rifle?
We call long guns rifles, so they're pretty much interchangeable.
I heard you say you never heard of long rifles. I use long guns right there, but it's the same, one and the same. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. De Leon. And colleagues, I know we have Mr. T-Fink still. If we could get a very brief overview, because I know we are holding up public comment and the remainder of our business today. And Mr. Buscaino, did you have something that you wanted to add before we turn it to Mr. T-Fink?
Oh, just a question for Chief Moore, but I'll wait, Madam Chair.
Okay, well, go ahead real quick.
Okay, just Chief Moore, you raise an important issue as it relates to enhancements. I'm really concerned with the DA's actions of not moving on enhancements. I'm not going to get political here, but it goes back to the consequences, right? The message, and I'm not a psychologist, but I think common sense can tell you that if bad guy out in the streets knows that they're not going to get any enhancements in the crimes that are committed, then you'll see more crime committed knowing that there's fewer consequences. But again, that's elections have consequences, and I'm hopeful that we'll see how this pans out in the DA's office. And then lastly, Madam Chair, if I can, the issue I'm very concerned about the victimization of homelessness, the most vulnerable in our city today. You said homicide victims, 1 in 5 are homeless. You're seeing narcotic sales and distribution in and around encampment sites. I want to acknowledge the police department's efforts, and the messages or the alerts that I get clearly indicates if the victim or suspect is homeless. So what would you recommend? How do we curb that spike in homicides in encampments, or even dealing with the drug sales that are pushing in and out of the encampments?
Well, I think the pandemic's impact has been that the size of encampments are growing, and the lack of deconstructing those during daytime, and the impact on cleanup services is allowing the criminal element to really deepen their foothold. And so that individuals that are experiencing homelessness are not by definition, because it's such a wide spectrum of everyone from very young to very old, and everyone along that path and from various backgrounds. But within encampments that become hotbeds for distribution of narcotics is a challenge for the department to untangle, because you have basically a community that is in effect distributing the narcotics within itself, and the ability to break into that or operate it so you can identify how the path of the narcotics to get there, the distribution. We do work on that, but it's been greatly impacted when encampments are extended and our web, a honeycomb of compartments and areas. And so that the ability to obscure, if you will, who's responsible for the distribution of narcotics is very much impacted. The use of narcotics is, of course, also has been decriminalized, and the chronic use of it, though, because it's the level of which a simple possession is continually decriminalized to a misdemeanor or less, has kept us from also developing sources of information for people who are chronic users, who might lead us to people who are capitalizing on that. So in short, I would ask us to, as we exit this pandemic, to look at our ability to control the size of these encampments and also the cleanliness of these encampments, so that you can effectively work on the criminal element within the encampments without harming those that are simply trying to find shelter.
I mean, if we were in court, I'd say I'd rest my case. This is something that I've been advocating for here, colleagues, and I'm looking forward to having that discussion in its format through committee, of course, and through the entire body. I appreciate the response and recognizing these impacts, and most importantly, the most vulnerable of our population, those living on the streets, and how they are becoming victimized ever more so now. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Buscaino, and thank you, Chiefs, for your very informative presentation. Again, these are issues that we're going to dig a lot deeper on. Chief Grimala, I know we've had conversations about just how we measure the engagement of our senior lead officers, all of our forward-facing community efforts, and so that we can maximize the opportunities to build those community relationships that will help provide more insightful information that will help better focus the work of the men and women of this department. And we're so grateful for the work that they do. I want to go ahead and offer this moment to Mr. T. Fank. It's good to see you, sir, always. And just provide a very quick, we know that the commission is working on a lot of issues, and wanted to afford you the opportunity to inform this committee on the work of the commission.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to you and your fellow committee members. Very briefly, the The commission is focused on ensuring the department provides the policing in this city in a constitutional, fair, and unbiased manner. And to that matter, the way they get there is through the implementation of policy. We've recently adopted a use of force policy that's been revised to comply with state law. We also adopted a consent search policy, which requires officers, as they obtain consent search, to record that on their body-worn camera, so it is memorialized. We've also revised the search warrant policy, outlining how search warrants are to be conducted and the protocol to do such. We're currently in the process of reviewing our bias policing policy, and we're currently in the process of beginning to work with the department on the implementation of recommendations that came from the Inspector General's report on stops. The Racial Identifying Profiling Act, RIPA as it is known, captures data on every stop that officers make. That data is prepared and analyzed and published by the state on a yearly basis. What we're looking for is the department to take that data that they capture on a daily basis and then be able to evaluate that data on a daily basis at each of the area commands by the commanding officers to identify any activities that are occurring that are out of the norm and identify any officers that are doing things out of the norm so there can be a proactive interjection into that process. So that process is ongoing. We're meeting with the department in about a month to have a presentation on the prototype of what that's going to look like. So we're very confident that's going to be a very good step forward. We're also ensuring that the department's training is training to the policies, and that the training is very important. We can have a policy if we're not training to it and we're not having supervision and management hold people accountable to the policy, that becomes difficult. So it's development of a policy, training to the policy, and then holding people accountable to the policy. And that's the process that the commission is looking at now as the department goes about doing its work.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tiefenk. We appreciate you. Colleagues, did you have any further questions? Seeing none, thank you all again very much. We appreciate it. Of course, this is a primer for some of the conversations and the work that we will engage in deeper conversations through the course of this year. And we just appreciate you helping to set the tone and the real baseline of the work that we need to dig in and to do all the work to support you all in the work that you do. We appreciate you and the men and women of this department. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, if I could just steal a few minutes
of course.
From the chiefs. And Mr. Tiefenk, listen, a few things. One, I just wanted to thank them for the way that they've handled this work. I grew up in this town at a time when homicides went up in South LA and nobody said a word. It was just like, that's what those people do. And, we had to scream to get the attention of law enforcement. And so now my phone rings before I even find out that there's something happening on the streets. And so I just want to thank them for that. I can't emphasize that enough. Also, their open door policy and working with the interventionists and community intervention workers has, I think, made a big difference and allows us to have a greater handle on public safety. Because we're short on time, I want to ask my two questions really quickly. One is this business with the lines, and you touched on it, Chief Gramala. So in this last spate that we had, we were looking at LA numbers, but Compton had an increase. The unincorporated area had an increase, and Inglewood had an increase. And it all, it's an east-west thing, and they're different jurisdictions. And, I'm always a little worried that, am I getting the full picture, what's actually happening here? So I wanted to hear more about how you think about that. And then I'll close with this for the chief. It's an anecdote, but I think it's important because it feeds into the larger narrative, particularly here in South LA. I had a neighbor, see me out front, and he stopped, and, we just talked a little bit. He says, hey, I want to tell you something because you're my guy. I says, what? He says, I just want you to know I'm going to be carrying my gun now because there's just too much shooting going on. I just want you to know in case I get in trouble why they're going to catch me with a gun because there's just too much happening. And, he knew all the shootings even better, frankly, than I did. And so I was kind of stuck for what to say to him. And I know that he's representative of lots and lots and lots of people out there and why, they're more and more, there's greater proliferation for guns. That's a person who's owned a gun the entire time, but doesn't normally take it out of the house. But during this time period, felt like he needed to. So I'll leave you all with those two questions.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Marquise Harris Dawson. Thank you. Nice to see you again as well. To your point about kind of the artificial borders, I mean, we see, you know, hey, this is LAPD's line of demarcation, and we know that criminal activity, crime trends and patterns don't recognize that. And we see that every single night, 24/7, as my phone rings, as yours does, as you said, and you get these notifications. So I think what's extremely important, especially in South Bureau, is that CSOC model. And who is there every single day on the calls sharing information? Because without communication, we've got nothing. We're all going to be working in a vacuum. We're not going to be able to be preventative in any way. That's where Ann again and her folks come into account too. But we have representation from the jurisdictions, from Inglewood, from the Sheriff's Department, et cetera, on those CSOC calls on a daily basis so we can exchange fresh information. And I think that's critical so that we don't think, we're going to have the info hoard and we're not going to tell you because, we want to grandstand. All those artificial barriers that, quite frankly, used to exist years ago, I think have really melted away, and I think we're all better for it, but especially the community's safety is better for it. And we always know we can do better and increase and bring more people to that fold, but the chief really encourages us to build those partnerships, not because it sounds like it's something good or nifty to say, it's because it saves lives. So thank you for that.
And thank you, Chief Kamala. And I'll just edify that in my conversations with Sheriff Villanueva, this has been one of the most driving issues is South Los Angeles, is the divisions and Southern Division working with us and us with them. And watch commanders are talking back and forth. Detectives are cross-bordering. But I'm also proud that in the last, I think this last quarter, and Ann would have to speak to this, is getting interventionist access to the sheriffs. We believe that that's the next generational growth, is that this model that here is in GRID in South Los Angeles, that it expand across the unincorporated areas and into those sets that are outside of our boundaries.
Here, here.
That's good.
Yeah.
So that's okay. There's that. Now, as to your neighbor, this you raised an issue that I've heard over the years, and I think you also raised it in concert with a conversation about this not being a cultural item, that the death and destruction and that we've seen come back here, this increase, that we're not accepting it.
Mm-hmm.
We need that same ideology about it's not okay to carry a gun. A gun will not stop somebody from shooting you. A gun will promote further violence. And I just can't say it any more plainly than that. Every study, when you go across the country, the more relaxed the gun laws are, the more death and loss of life. Whether it's at the hands of a person who they think they're defending themselves, but things escalate, mistakes are made, situations grow quickly out of hand. And in fact, in South Los Angeles has seen this with shop owners and others that have seen escalation of violence result in death because there's a presence of a gun. So I would just ask from a community outreach and engagement that, yes, we're talking about, this department has a culture that it doesn't allow for this violence to go without us rattling the saber and saying we've got to change. This is a call to action. But South Los, even the most violent areas of our city, are far safer today than just 15 years ago. And so this sense that we're creating, it is important that we have this call, that we have this discussion, we have this sense of urgency. That's what has made this city a world-class city. But at the same time, our communities, we're asking them to keep this in perspective and not resort to carrying guns, not resort to using violence as a means of promoting peace. That is a spiral that will cause further violence and result in more loss of innocent lives that we must avoid. So to those, there is no pass. When that person calls you, Councilman, with, hey, I got caught up in just kind of rolled through a stop sign and now I'm in jail because I've got a gun. The department is, we need to get the guns off the street, and we need people to keep them. If they're going to have them, put them in a safe and secure location. So that's my pitch.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief Grimala and Mr. T. Fank. We appreciate you. Thank you very much. Stay well. Colleagues, we do have folks in the queue for public comment, so we will be taking approximately 40 minutes of public comment. And then, are you ready? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Caller ending in 8408, press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, caller. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on. Caller, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Yeah, hi, my name is Peter. I'd like to speak on 5.8 and general public comment, please.
Okay, you have 2 minutes plus 1 minute for general public comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say, 40 minutes of public comment after a 2-hour wait seems pretty inappropriate. Secondly, for item 5, I think we already know the answer. The answer is that it's systemic and institutional. I think, why do you think a group of white supremacists felt emboldened to attack a black woman in broad daylight in front of LAPD headquarters with police right there? Like, why do you think LAPD did nothing when she came to them and pointed to her attackers across the street? We all know the answer, and that's that this wasn't a failure. It's an illustration of exactly what LAPD is as an institution, and that is on the side of white supremacy. We know because these actions aren't limited to that day, right? We saw them take no action at Dodger Stadium. We continually see them take no action when white supremacist anti-lockdown protesters show up across our city, endangering lives and breaking laws, because they and LAPD are one and the same. And that's why there isn't trust in LAPD to provide public safety generally. And this ties directly with number 8. And I urge you to not approve this report uncritically. When the mayor says CSP is measured by the trust they build, you cannot isolate CSP from the rest of LAPD, and you certainly shouldn't use things like CSP to try and purchase trust that the department hasn't earned. Trust comes from accountability, and LAPD hasn't and doesn't deserve that trust because we know how they react to calls for accountability. We saw it this past summer when the chief of police himself directly blamed protesters for the murder of George Floyd and then sent LAPD to meet peaceful protesters with violence and police riots. They then arrested, misgendered, groped, assaulted, degraded, illegally vaginally searched people. It was retaliation, pure and simple, for daring to suggest that LAPD be held accountable. We've seen this police violence before. We saw it yesterday in downtown with police interrupting a Black Lives Matter press conference, and we're going to see it again and again and again until you all do something. So within the context of all this, when CSP is brought up forward as a way to increase trust and safety, you all need to call bullshit. Like, just stealing the language of reimagining police to reinforce the status quo is pretty fucking gross. You should all trust the people of LA in making policy. Trust the 63% of people in LA who want you to redirect funding away from the police to social programming. CSP does the exact opposite, holding social service funding hostage to a requirement of police presence and involvement. Trust the 90% of people in LA who believe it is not the LAPD's job to be, quote, part of the community. Trust the 80% of people in LA who want unarmed crisis response that is distinctly not police. When people take to the streets in historic numbers with a simple direct demand to defund the police, and are then offered CSP, which inserts police into community investment as a condition for community investment, it's not just a complete failure to heed the call, it's an insult. It's disregard and complete dismissal from the city council that's intended to listen to.
Caller ending in 9204, press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, caller. Please state your name.
Can you hear me?
Speak on.
Yeah, my name is Adam Smith, and I'd like to speak on 2.8 in general public comment.
Go ahead. You've got 2 minutes plus 1 minute for general public comment.
All right, thanks. Item 2, during Ann Tremblay's presentation about GRID, she mentioned how close GRID works with the LAPD, so of course I'm upset she didn't mention the latest $200,000 contract that was signed with Legacy LA on July 31st of last year, about 3 weeks before Mayor Garcetti nominated Legacy LA's Executive Director Lou Calanche to the Board of Police Commissioners. I'm not here to question the good works of GRID and their partners in the community, but I'm extremely concerned that Kalanche's role as a mayor-appointed police commissioner is in direct conflict with her organization's financial ties to the GRID program and her org's interconnections with the Community Safety Partnership. Further, LAPD Sergeant Monique Valenzuela, who's on the board of Legacy LA, apparently served on the GRID panel last year that evaluates proposals that community-based orgs like Legacy LA submit to GRID for funding. So this would appear to add to what already seems to be an incredibly troubling conflict of interest regarding Legacy LA, GRID, Mayor Garcetti, LAPD, and specifically the Community Safety Partnership. Speaking of the intertwining issues with this Community Safety Partnership, I will move to item 8, resources for HACLA to be going directly to the communities that have been historically under-resourced and over-policed and not used to reimburse LAPD salaries and fund surveillance on city-owned public housing properties, which this MOU has historically done and continues to do. Community Safety Partnership isn't a reimagination of public safety, it's lipstick on a pig. UCLA professor Jeffrey Brantingham, who helped provide research that informed the 2020 UCLA report that was used to legitimize the expansion of the Community Safety Partnership, has in his research infamously compared black and brown youth to hunter-gatherers and stated that, and I quote, the behaviors of a hunter-gatherer uses to choose a wildebeest versus a gazelle are the same calculations a criminal uses to choose a Honda versus a Lexus. Brantingham also is the creator of Predpol, and in selling that software to the LAPD for years, profited off the targeting of black and brown youth by the LAPD, so it seems also that a disgusting conflict that he's a lead researcher at GRID. And for public comment, I'll note that during that presentation, the speaker mentioned that she was sharing slides, and we as the public can't see that on an audio-only call, so that seems like an issue. I don't know if it's a Brown Act issue, but it's certainly an issue for me not being able to see the slides that we're showing. And lastly, as a committee named Public Safety, I think it would be prudent for you 5 to push for Council President Martinez to immediately begin meeting on Fridays again in the name of public safety. I actually wrote a song about it last Friday. Check your inboxes. And feel free to subscribe to my Patreon at Another Adam Smith, unless you're Joe Buscaino, which at least one of you appear to be.
Thank you, caller.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 7821. With the last 4 digits, 7821, press *6 to unmute yourself.
Caller, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Yes, I am looking to speak on agenda item number 2 and general comment.
Okay, you have 1 minute for item 2 and 1 minute for general public comment. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Tina Padilla. I work for Breaking Through Barriers to Success, who is part of the Los Angeles Intervention Coalition. We provide intervention services in Northeast Los Angeles. We are peacekeepers in our community. We are violence interrupters. And since this pandemic hit, we have become virus interrupters, bringing much needed resources to the community. Why? Because our community trusts us. We are from the community. We care about and are invested in the community. We are asking that the $54 million be invested in intervention as part of the public safety strategy. Now is the time. Us as intervention workers have made a huge impact in helping to deter gang-related incidents. Right now is the time to invest in your intervention workers. Many of us do this job because it's our calling, but we also need to have a standard living wage with benefits to continue this work. We put our lives on the line daily. We are on call 24/7. When the phone rings, we answer the call. We go into communities with no gun, no badge, and no bulletproof vest. We go in with only our word, and we calm tensions. We bring peace. How can we think about reimagining public safety without including intervention, who has been around for years? We have professionalized this field. We know the community. We know the temperatures of the community. We really need the $54 million to be invested in us as intervention workers. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next caller ending in 9933, press *6 to unmute yourself.
Caller, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on. Caller,
Can you
please
hear me?
name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Yes. My name is Kevin Dieterle. I'm a resident of DTLA. Just yesterday, the LAPD physically
Which item
abused and arrested people. Item 8 and general public comment.
Okay, you've got 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Just yesterday, the LAPD physically abused and arrested peaceful protesters in my neighborhood. Months ago, I watched as the LAPD intentionally ran over a peaceful protester just inches from where I was standing. I watched as they mercilessly tear gassed fellow protesters. I watched as they mass arrested people exercising their constitutional rights. I watched regularly as the police harassed and displaced my unhoused neighbors. I've watched as they murdered Angelinos, recorded for the entire world to see without fear of consequence. As Mr. Buscaino himself mentioned earlier this evening, if a criminal knows they won't be held to account, they will continue to engage in criminal activity. And indeed, that very dynamic is inherent to LAPD's conduct. Abusive tactics and escalating violence are literally the only things that the LAPD does well. And the notion that public officials would grant a public agency that brutalizes and devastates our communities even more public funding is not just a complete perversion of the very notion of public service. It's irresponsible, it's indefensible, and it is cruel beyond measure. And that it's even being considered after the events of the last few months simply demonstrates just how far removed the council is from the wants and needs of Angelinos. Policing is an inherently racist and corrupt institution that cannot and it will not be reformed. And the notion is underscored when elected officials continuously enable and reward police abuse, and further underscored when they reject any and all measures of transparency, accountability, or justice. Not only would this proposal disproportionately harm BIPOC communities, as policing was explicitly designed to do since its very inception, it deliberately places them in harm's way by increasing the likelihood that they will be forced to interact with the police, who time and again show absolutely no regard for their humanity whatsoever. Police have no place whatsoever in any so-called community safety solutions when they are the foremost perpetrators of violence that systematically traumatizes our most marginalized communities. And if you care about our communities, you will not support the destructive proposal in item number 8. If you care about our communities, you will defund the police.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 9917, press star 6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, caller. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Item 8 and general public comment, please.
Okay, you have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, I am firmly opposed to the concept of expanding the community safety partnerships. I believe it is immoral for LAPD to seek funds from the housing department to pay the staff that they have on these premises. The LAPD has reported a surplus this year. They get to keep $140 million of it, and yet they're requesting millions from other departments in the city to pay their officers. I find that highly immoral. And I also believe that, in general, these partnerships should not exist because officers in our community do not contribute to the wellness of the community, do not contribute to the stability of the community. The rents remain the same in these communities, even when you bring in these officers. And I don't believe that an officer with a broken jump shot is going to teach my kid how to play basketball any better than somebody in my community who actually knows what they're doing and has made a connection with my kid before. So I don't see how expanding Los Angeles police into letting their tentacles into every single element of our community is going to make our community any more resemble anything other than just an outdoor jail. I don't believe that we're bringing safety to communities. I think we're bringing safety to rich and comfortable people like Marquise Harris Dawson, who are quite content to let the city turn into a rich person's playground and a poor person's jail. And Marquise Harris Dawson, for you to come into these meetings and kiss, the boot of Chief Michael Moore is highly offensive to all of your constituents in District 8 who have been trying to meet with you on urgent issues in your community, and you're out here talking about your friends carrying guns, and Chief Moore is responding with an example that basically sounds like the murder of Daniel Hernandez by a police officer and doesn't sound like anything resembling what I see in my community every day. Highly offensive, highly immoral, and complete disgrace to your community, Marquise Harris Dawson. We are beyond disappointed.
Caller with the number ending in 2806, press star 6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, caller. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on. 2806. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Caller ending in the number 2912, press star 6 to unmute yourself, ending in 2912.
Hi, caller. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
My name is Jeremy Babich. I'd like to speak on item number 8.
Okay, you've got 1 minute. Go ahead.
All right, starting my time. Hi, Mitch. I just wanted to kind of lift up some of the voices from South LA, Watts in particular, especially the Watts Neighborhood Council, which is already voted against Amendment 4 in a special meeting. So we've already heard that the community is not into it. The concept of defunding the police scares a lot of people, gets a lot of people talking. What we're talking about is taking the resources away from handguns and murder and handcuffs into services, right? Like the last caller said, some cop harassing kids or standing around or contributing to a police state environment at LA public housing is not going to help actually increase public safety, especially when the Southeast Precinct in Watts is currently closed from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. daily due to CSP. Let's actually work to fix the problems causing crime, right? Like more hammers is not going to fix our problem.
Thank you. Your time is up.
One more time, caller with the number ending in 2806, press star 6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, caller. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
My name is Martha Mendez, and I'd like to speak on agenda item number 2 and general comment.
Okay, you've got 2 minutes. Go ahead.
I'm Martha Mendez. I'm the program coordinator speaking today for Volunteers of America Los Angeles Grid Program Southwest 2. We're here supporting and working alongside with the Los Angeles Intervention Coalition. Our agency provides wraparound services and valuable resources that enable our youth, young adults, and their families to access jobs, education, and housing services. Volunteers of America oversees 4 intervention grid sites. The areas we serve in the communities are in the Pico Union area, western South Los Angeles, central South Los Angeles, and the east historical side of South Los Angeles. I'm seeking to sincerely express that I know and believe that the investment of the $54 million can and will generate innovative ways of using methods of diverse strategies, teaching compassionate advocacy to those that have been harmed by the violence of today. It is important to recognize that interventionists have a unique ability to form relationships, build trust, and impact their communities by not only being relatable but transparent, opening up to individuals who are taught to impact other people, then further can impact the generation to come. I can't begin to express how imperative the need is to expand growth, essentially to have community members authorized and trained to be the first resource and solution. Community members are problem solvers to local misinterpreted needs, concerns, and issues. They are the voice that matters to identify those directly impacted and can work to redirect the outward evidence we see in violence and death. I truly believe increased funding will generate an increased value our city is so desperately seeking to live in. I'm expressing to each of you that there are no doubts that when individuals provided the correct tools,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Caller with the number ending in 2234, press star 6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, caller. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Item number 3 and general comment.
Okay, you have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mia Levis Porter. I live in CD 13. This is National Gun Violence Survivor Week, and I am a survivor of gun violence, and I volunteer with Moms Band Action. You know, I just want to express how troubled I am by the recent spike in shootings and homicides in Los Angeles, and that we know we can do something about this. We need to address this by increasing funding for peacemakers and increasing the number of gang intervention workers. We know that law enforcement alone can't address this spike in violence, and we support the LA Intervention Coalition in their call for $54 million to fund more peacemakers who can keep peace on the streets of LA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next caller with the number ending in 0899, press star 6.
Hi, caller. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Hi, this is Stacey Johnson Stearns. How you doing? It's been a long day, y'all. I want to talk on 5, 8, and general public comment.
Okay, you have 3
All right,
minutes.
so item 5, Bloomfield Cedillo, why you waste your time asking for a report back on the investigation into the attack when you guys could just ask the police commission to reschedule their damn meetings so that they're not happening simultaneous to city council meetings. It's complete bullshit. It's totally intended to divide public, the ability for the public to monitor our electeds and our officials, and it's complete bullshit. And you're just looping around because you don't know what's going on because you can't be in 2 places at one time. As a matter of fact, it's hard for some of you to be in one place at one time. So let's move on. Number 8, hell no. Double hell no. We're not asking for you to pour money from housing into policing. We're not asking for community safety partnerships. We're asking for cops to get the fuck out of our neighborhoods, get their hands off of our people, and stop killing us and abusing us, okay? So if anyone so I think the only person that's on this committee that might be listening to me is Councilmember DeLeon, because I know the rest of y'all are you're bought in so hook, line, and sinker. We've got a head of the committee, a chair who takes more money from the Los Angeles Police Protective League than any other CM. And then we've got Buckets, who's a cop. I don't really quite understand why there's not a conflict of interest. We've been asking. I don't understand why you guys literally ask. You have 2 hours of propaganda presentations to numb your brains. No one's thinking about the fact that the Michael Moore changes the narrative. I also want to point out, I'm sorry, I'm kind of veering off topic, but I don't care. Buckets. How dare you say I don't want to be political and then you drag in your Q-influenced Gaston hate? How dare you? You are obstructing justice. This person was elected DA. So sit down. We know you're going to go up for election soon. How do you like it if we'd attack you like that if you get your mayor spot, which you won't? You can go for sheriff, but you won't get that either because we're done with you. We're done with social Darwinism, we're done with white supremacy, and we're done with you. I wish that you guys would have the nerve to invite Black Lives Matter into this meeting, and the nerve to invite LAPC Fails into this meeting, and the nerve to invite Stop LAPD Spying into this meeting, because everyone's asking, gosh, we've got to talk to the community, we've got to find out what the community says. Well, they're the people who've been attending these meetings, the police commission meetings for 4 years, 5 years, but they're not invited into this space. Give them a seat at the table. We're sick of asking. It's time to demand. I yield my time.
Thank you.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 7186, press star 6 to unmute.
Caller, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Yes, my name is Alex, and I'm going to be speaking on agenda item 8 and general public comment.
Okay, you have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Before I start, whoever is using that alarm, it's really loud and obnoxious and going directly in everyone who's listening to this conversation's ears, so maybe use a silent alarm. The idea of community-safe partnerships is both ironic and laughable, as we have seen time and time again that LAPD doesn't wish to protect anyone aside from violent white supremacists, just like we saw at City Hall on January 6th, and their presence and lack of empathy and triggering for our unhoused community members, as they are typically the ones arresting them, and then they're the ones throwing away their belongings in these disgusting, ironically named care sweeps. Also, officers are dying all the time of COVID because they refuse to wear their masks. So not only are they going around spreading it to each other, but they would be going around spreading it to our community. They are the perpetrators in everything. and not to mention, we need to be putting this money into mutual aid organizations. Give that funding to them. We keep saying defund the police, and you go, oh, do you mean give the police more money? That's not what we're saying. You need to fucking listen. I have more rapport with the camp down the street from my house that I visit every Saturday with supplies than some cop who lives up in Simi Valley. LAPD has $130 million budget surplus, and that money can go to commandeering the hotels, and that will go 100% get you reimbursed from FEMA. Not to mention, you're talking about victims and victims and victims. What about the victims of LAPD? Do you even give a shit about them? You're talking about victims like Gascon is letting out the perpetrators and victims. No, he is creating real change that we want, that we voted for. The data is clear. Increased police presence, I'm going on general public comment, FYI, leads to more harm in the community and more bullshit. Police don't keep us safe ever. I am a privileged-ass white woman, and any police presence, whether in their car or standing next to me, terrifies me into almost immobility. Yesterday, I watched them target a 70-year-old member of Black Lives Matter whom they sprained his fingers before in November at the mayor's house, and they beat everyone there with batons. Oh my God, that fucking alarm. Stop it.
Thank you. Time's up.
Caller ending in 5137, press star 6 to unmute yourself, please.
Caller, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Hi, my name is Jamie Penn. I'm the Subdistrict 3 rep for Worcester Center Koreatown Neighborhood Council, although I'm calling around a court. My pronouns are she, her. I'd like to speak on item 3 and item 8 in general public comment.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so on item 3, the presentation, the statistics and everything. So American policing has never been a neutral institution. In fact, the first U.S. City Police Department was a slave patrol. Modern-day police forces have consistently and historically delivered oppression and violence at black people to enforce Jim Crow, wage the war on drugs, and crack down on protests, which I myself have personally witnessed. When asked, for police reform, many people are asking for this oppressive system to be dismantled and to invest in institutions, resources, and services that help communities grow and thrive. That's why many protesters and activists following in the footsteps of protest-led activists that are black that are demanding immediate defunding of police departments. I'd like to move on to speak on item 8. Now, taking the funding from the Housing Authority, there was actually a surplus reported by LAPD this last year. And for over a year now, the public has been calling to defund them. The public, namely the People's Budget LA, they actually went out and did the work, collected the data from the public, who overwhelmingly voiced their desire to defund the police department and put our city funding elsewhere. And I'd like to move on to my general public comment. Now, a study published by LMU actually was very clear that the public overwhelmingly supports the ideas of reimagining the approach of policing and the role of police officers in our community. In fact, 82% of them actually showed support for an unarmed model of LAPD. And the public is very clear on their wants and desires. We no longer think that we deserve to be at the mercy of police violence and oppression. Defund the police. I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 5404, press star 6 to unmute yourself, please.
Caller, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on. Caller, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on. Did they unmute?
5404, press star 6 again, please.
Hi, my name is Jamie, and I would like to speak on item 8 and general public comment. Can you hear me?
Yep, you got 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. I've heard a lot today about data-informed policing, and that was what motivated me to call. I have a background in statistics. I went to Wharton as well as I have a master's degree from the University of Texas. like to talk a little bit about synthetic control method, which is the methodology that's used in the papers supporting the Community Safety Partnership. I'd also like to refer the committee to a paper from Alberto Abadi out of MIT in the June 2020 Journal of Economic Literature. I have a lot of concerns that you're being steered towards something using essentially bad data analysis. The credibility of the results depend crucially on the level of diligence exerted in the application of the method and on whether contextual and data requirements are met in the empirical application at hand. I do not believe that happened. Critically, with synthetic control method, it's dependent on something called the stable unit treatment value assumption, which requires that there be no interaction between units assigned to control and treatment conditions. I do not believe that that can happen here when you have both the control, which is essentially the areas not exposed to Community Safety Partnership, and treatment, which is the ones that have gotten Community Safety Partnership, are both in units being run by the LAPD. So the potential outcome in one unit should not depend on the potential outcomes in any other units assigned to treatment or control. Ironically, this kind of methodological analysis would actually be best suited for a non-LAPD based intervention, something like community support, something of that nature. But in my understanding and reading of these papers, that was the thing that jumped out to me, that I do not believe that this is the appropriate statistical method of analysis. And there's a couple other things that jump out to me as well.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 179, press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, caller. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Hi, my name is Rashab, and I'd like to speak on item number 8.
Okay, you've got 1 minute. Go ahead.
So I think that we have to be very, very clear on the effects of more long-term placement of police officers in these areas. I think you would have to be lying to yourself if you're not worried about the potential aggression, violence, and tension this is going to cause, all to the detriment of the residents of the public. This is under the umbrella of the Community Safety Partnership and forming trust, but unless these residents specifically ask or want this, we know that this is not going to lead to more trust or safety for them, but in fact, the opposite, especially because the higher percentage of these people are people of color, specifically Black and Indigenous people. On top of that, increasing funding to the police, who are already unbelievably overfunded, is a large misuse of their funds. If your intentions are truly to help the people in these public housing developments, which I hope it is, there are many other ways to allocate funds that don't involve more policing, but instead can enhance their lives. If this is passed, it will directly hurt the actual people of our city rather than help them, especially to the tune of millions of dollars. I highly, highly encourage you as a representative, not only the city, but a representative of the people of the city, to please vote in opposition to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Caller with the number ending in 1960, press *6 to unmute.
Caller, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on. Caller, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Caller with the private number, press *6 to unmute.
Caller, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Yes, hello, it's Pepito Pig. All items in general comment, please.
Okay, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Now, you see, there's a lot of criticism, but you see the lovely Monica Rodriguez, she gives you time to speak, unlike her other council pigs, like Kevin De Leon, who only gave 10 minutes total cumulative time for the entire city of 4 million people, Mr. T-Fang. You need to investigate this, yes. Now you get to item number 8. Keys, not handcuffs. According to the report by the Honorable Joseph Bucket, we need to take a bulldozer to all the major encampments because they're being run by gangs. You go to Venice Boulevard and Sepulveda Boulevard. You cannot cross on either side of the street unless you pay rent. Yes, how unfortunate. It's terrible, isn't it? When Joey Buckets, a.k.a. Joseph Buckets, is actually correct. Too bad it took 2.5 hours to wait to hear the truth. After this meeting, they would delete his comments, yes. And thank you to Grimala. I thought Grimala had fled the country, but I can see she signed her immunity agreement. Thank you so much for that. And then the failure of our police chief, Michelle Moore de Constanza, yes, the fake Byzantine Spaniard, yes. He needs to go. Put Grimala in charge. Pepita Pig told you that in 2018. You did not listen. Now we will go to the general comment period, if I may, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Now, Mr. Harris Dawson, apologize to Lynn Moses. You tried to get one of those phony spinner TROs against him, didn't you? And the judge said, no. You're acting like Herb Wilson. You don't want another FBI probe. That's right. You tried to hurt the Lynn Moses. You tried to get people arrested in TROs. And you've been trying to have people beaten by police officers for expressing their First Amendment privileges. So yes, let the process continue. Let the funding continue. And most of all, give money to the Jose Wizard Defense Fund to contribute. Call 213-473-7008 and let them know you support Jose Wizard being acquitted of all of his good deeds. The FBI doesn't understand. You can't build shit unless you do shit.
Caller with the last 4 digits, 2616. Press *6 to unmute yourself, please.
Hi, caller. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on.
Thanks. It's Eric President. I'll speak on the items and I'll give a little general public comment as well.
Okay, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think that, there's a lot of stress in the room between the individuals who rightfully are fed up with gouging by LAPD and a kind of excessive law enforcement ethos as opposed to some community partnerships. But I also understand that there's a lot of murkiness there. And one thing that's really problematic, and I thought maybe the chief, Michael Moore, and Monica Rodriguez, the head of public safety, and the new member to public safety, Mr. De Leon, could work together to try to get Mr. Villanueva, who's playing the role of sheriff now as an elected official of the county, to be able to cooperate more with the county board of supervisors, who are a little out to lunch at the moment with regard to the county council as the guy who is prosecuting the sheriff, and it's become a kind of they're dredging up old business that's very upsetting about tattoos and gangs, but this is a distraction from a time when the public is experiencing, more crime. And we, can't have that, and we need to be working together cooperatively. And I think that even though, you're mostly tied up screwing up the city, Chief Moore, it would be good to kind of try to bring these groups together because it's so important. Everybody understands that law enforcement is a group of people working together, and unfortunately that relationship has been tarnished. So we have to get it back on the rails somehow, but it can only happen working together. Now, I will say Englander is gone, and we're happy about that. There should be no confusion, though, that any kind of retaliation on individuals who participated in tipping the FBI on the kind of, police industrial complex at City Hall and the Englander, Knobby, and Allen firm would be threatened in any way is not tolerable. And I just want to make that clear. We see you, okay? And there will be none of that. None of the journalists or gadflies or whatever you want to call these individuals who, have called out some of the wrongdoing can be adversely impacted subsequent to the indictment of Englander, who will do 14 months. It's a great shame on all of us. We could all take a moment and hang our heads low for a moment at how he humiliated all of us. But we'll move on because that's what cities do. And, you know, if they can get Garcetti, we can wait for that to happen. It will snow in Los Angeles as well, Madam Chair. But I do look forward to a tenure where we adjust the ethos from aggressively pulling people over based on race and creed and all this weird energy and get back to, you know,
Thank you,
supporting.
Thank you, Mr. Previn.
Caller with the number ending in 6068, press star 6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, caller. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on. Caller, please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on. No response.
Caller ending in 9330, press star 6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, caller. Please state your name and the items you'd like to speak on. Press star 6. Okay. That concludes general public comment, colleagues. I'd like to recommend that we continue item 6 on today's agenda and that we take items 4, 5, 7 through 18 on consent with the approval of the recommendations in the CAO report for items number 12, 17, and 18. Are there any objections? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, if you'd please call the roll.
Calling the roll to continue item number 6 and take items 4, 5, and 7 through 18 on consent. Madam Chair Rodriguez?
Aye.
Councilmember O'Farrell?
Aye.
Councilmember Buscaino is no longer present in the meeting for the record. Councilmember De Leon?
Aye.
And also for the record, Councilmember Harris Dawson joined the meeting at around 3:50 p.m. In the middle of the department presentations. May I have your vote, please?
Yes.
4 yeses. The recommendations and continuation of the item are approved.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you so much for sticking through today's lengthy agenda. I look forward to the work ahead. We've got quite a large agenda before us for the year. So thank you very much. Our meeting stands adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.